So today's topic is glutathione and the use of glutathione for preventing COVID, preventing cytokine storm, and therefore severe outcomes in COVID. And earlier, well, I guess it was last year now, in the fall last year, I believe, it may have even been summer that far ago, but I covered a previous study on, which was a hypothesis study in the journal by the American Chemical Society called Infectious Diseases. And this author put forth the hypothesis that he believed, I'm assuming that Alexi is a male, it may be a female, but this person believed or suspected that endogenous deficiency of glutathione is the most likely cause of severe COVID outcomes. So it's a hypothesis paper, and this person put this awesome graphic together to show that they believe glutathione deficiency is the foundation of severe outcomes, cytokine storm, and death in people who have COVID. And they supported it with all these studies that showed the risk factors for COVID: age, low glutathione intake, comorbidities or chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, etc., cigarette smoking, and actually being male. And this person's hypothesis is an increased risk factor because of glutathione deficiency, and males have lower glutathione than females. So this person put it all together to say these factors drive a glutathione deficiency, and depending on where your glutathione level is, that may increase viral replication all the way up to cytokine storm and death. So today, this study has come out more recently, right at the end of the year. And again, this is another hypothesis paper that is supported by, it's a review paper that they went back and looked through a ton of research on COVID, on risk factors, and basic science on glutathione levels to say that they also believe that glutathione depletion could be the Trojan horse of COVID mortality. So what is glutathione? If you're not aware, glutathione is our body's master antioxidant. So, you know, you've probably heard of inflammation, and you've probably heard of oxidative stress, but that word is too sciencey, so you maybe breeze over it. But my metaphor for oxidative stress is rust, right? If you leave a steel bumper outside in the weather long enough, it's going to oxidize and become rusty. Well, in our bodies, we have oxidative stress. So you can picture it as rusting on the inside. And oxidative stress and inflammation are very similar. So we could basically just say inflammation and be saying the same thing. But when we zero in on oxidative stress, oxidation drives rust. Anti-rust is antioxidants. Okay, so we take antioxidants as an anti-rust strategy, or to neutralize the oxidative stress that is created naturally in our body through processes of, through mitochondrial processes to produce energy, etc. Our immune system creates oxidative stress to fight microbes and things like that. But then we're exposed to excess oxidative stress through all kinds of things, like environmental exposures, diet, physical activity, too much or too little, and all kinds of other things. So we need glutathione as our body's master antioxidant to neutralize the rust. The faster we rust, the faster we age. The faster we age, the closer we are to death. So glutathione literally slows down aging for us, is an anti-aging strategy, is an antioxidant strategy, is an anti-inflammatory strategy, and an antiviral strategy. And in being all of those things, these authors said, well, could this be the lowest common denominator for severe COVID outcomes and COVID death? So they're building the case for that with this paper, and I think they do it quite well. So if we start, they first start by laying out risk factors for COVID. And there's a stratification of risk factors. So the highest or most significant risk factors for severe COVID outcome are increased age, high blood pressure, ischemic heart disease, diabetes, and chronic respiratory diseases. So COPD, any sort of chronic lung issue. Then the next step down risk factors are obesity, pre-existing cancers, and smoking. And then the next step lower, equivocal evidence supporting risk. So that's like, could be, might be, might not be. But interestingly, one of those is NSAID medications as potential risk factors for COVID risk. So these are the risk factors that that are known for COVID. So the authors of this paper said, well, let's find out if there's an underlying theme or thread connecting all of these, the lowest common denominator. So they looked at variable common denominators, and they basically, they looked at C-reactive protein, they looked at white blood cell counts, they looked at vitamin D levels, lymphocyte counts, total protein, albumin, whether a person has a history of multivitamin and supplement intake, physical activity levels, glutathione. The only one that was supported by the research to be involved in all of those risk factors was the glutathione levels. All the rest of them were disproven as, the lowest common denominator. And so what they found was baseline levels of reduced glutathione, henceforth will just be glutathione for ease of communication, but baseline levels of reduced glutathione were the lowest common denominator connecting high-risk group for COVID mortality, and low baseline levels. And baseline was defined as what was the person's level of glutathione before development of COVID, okay? So they walked through and they said, all reported risk factors were identified to reduce the baseline glutathione level. So if you're of increased age, you have a lower baseline glutathione level. If you have high blood pressure, that lowers your glutathione. Heart disease, atherosclerosis, lower your glutathione. Diabetes, chronic lung disease, lower glutathione. Smoking and obesity, lower glutathione. So other things also that impair glutathione were alcoholism, kidney issues, cancer, chronic illnesses, and aspirin use. So if you're using aspirin chronically, that's a risk for reducing your glutathione, which could increase risk of severe COVID. A quote that I love from the paper here says, therefore, how could low glutathione levels, absolute or relative, put these patients at risk for developing a severe fatal form of the disease? And I love the absolute or relative comment, because you could have absolute low glutathione levels, like, hey, we test you and it's lab low. Everyone can see that. That's absolute. But relatively low levels could be a functionally low level, or a level that's not lab low. It looks like it's in normal range, but relative to the level of inflammation and oxidative stress going on in the body, this isn't enough to manage that. So then you pile on COVID-19 and holy cow, not enough glutathione, severe course, etc. So if the authors can show that glutathione could be useful in preventing severe case, preventing cytokine storm, then that's big, because as they say here, as of the time of the writing of this review, no definitive treatment is available for resolving the cytokine storm. Thus, prevention of this condition would be the cornerstone of management. Again, if we can prevent, then we don't need to worry about how long it takes to test a vaccine and develop a vaccine. We don't have to fight over ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. Are they good? Are they not? It's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So if we have science that shows us, look, the underlying lowest common denominator in these cases is glutathione deficiency, well then great, let's improve their glutathione levels, right? Other studies we've covered multiple times recently, vitamin D deficiency promotes cytokine storm and severe outcomes. Well, great, that's cheap. Let's get people's vitamin D up, right? So action, these are actionable targets. And so here's the graphic, the hypothetical role of glutathione that they developed, and I'm going to zoom in here. So you start with a SARS-CoV-2 infection, that's the virus, and that virus can induce a cytokine storm in a person. The cytokine storm is high levels of inflammation or oxidative stress. So ROS here is reactive oxygen species. That's a scientific term for the oxidative stress. So the cytokine storm produces rust, we'll say. Now, why would I have a severe case versus the person next to me be asymptomatic? Here's the crossroads. The asymptomatic person likely, and for the purposes of this study, which is looking at glutathione, the asymptomatic person has high levels of active glutathione at baseline. So they have sufficient levels. They're pre-infection, they've got enough levels to deal with the oxidative stress and inflammation they're facing, and clearly they have enough to deal with the addition of a COVID infection. So with high baseline levels, they can neutralize the extra oxidative stress, so the inflammation from the infection doesn't become cytokine storm and just severe case, it's just quenched, right? We used antioxidants or anti-rust, and bang, we have the infection, might have mild symptoms, recovery. The person with low levels of active glutathione baseline, so the more risk factors, the lower the levels. Maybe they're increased in age, maybe they're obese, and maybe they're on blood pressure meds. That person has depleted glutathione levels, which leads to the double whammy of increased oxidative stress and increased immune suppression, because glutathione promotes optimal antiviral defenses. So with both of those going on, two things can happen. With immune suppression, obviously you may not clear SARS-CoV-2 or the virus like we need to. So like this study said previously, low glutathione, increased viral replication, and the lower the glutathione, the faster and more the replication, the greater the viral load. So if we have low glutathione, low immune suppression, there's more unchecked replication of the virus, increased viral load, increased susceptibility of bad case. So perhaps end organ damage to the lungs, to the kidneys, to the, depending on the person, that we see various things. At the same time, the immune suppression could lead to secondary infection, which has been seen a lot in COVID. People with severe COVID not only have COVID, but maybe develop a bacterial pneumonia as well, or, MRSA in the hospital or something. So immune suppression opens you up to infection from anything and everything, right? Not just COVID. So those people may go downhill, irreversible damage, ventilator, death. If those people have end organ damage and are able, to be saved by maybe pharmaceutical intervention, maybe a monoclonal antibody treatment, or maybe ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or something, then they recover from the damaged tissue and recover. But the people who aren't helped in time, or for whatever reason, they go severe and they pass away. So that's the hypothesized breakdown. The better your glutathione levels, the better your outcome. The lower your glutathione levels, especially in addition to the more risk factors you have, the higher your risk for poor outcome. So they then go on to talk about all the roles of glutathione to support that graphic. And I just want to show you quick the antiviral effects. So glutathione has been shown to enhance the ability of macrophages against different viruses. Whether we're talking about H1N1, the last pandemic previous to this one, right, 2009, glutathione decreases lung inflammation in H1N1, okay, or flu, swine flu, okay. Also H5N1, a different flu. Glutathione has shown antiviral effects against dengue virus, against herpes simplex virus type 1, so the cold sores virus, right? If you have cold sores, that's HSV1 typically. Glutathione's been shown to suppress HIV. Glutathione decreases infection of rotavirus and decreased damage experienced in pigs after being infected with a Delta coronavirus. And look at this, glutathione has been shown to, well, N-acetylcysteine, which is a precursor to glutathione, has been shown to destroy SARS-CoV-1, okay? SARS-CoV-2 drives COVID, but SARS-CoV-1 is very closely related to it. N-acetylcysteine has been shown to destroy that. So N-acetylcysteine is an amino acid that you can take that is a precursor to glutathione. You can take NAC and or glutathione. So either one, there's lots of science to show that they have antiviral activity against a wide range of viruses. And the authors mentioned that nothing, those viruses we listed above, nothing was common among those viruses, which showed sensitivity to the glutathione. So some were DNA viruses, some were RNA viruses, some were respiratory, some were gut. So it's antiviral against all of those. So again, N-acetylcysteine is very inexpensive. Glutathione is more expensive, but both are, relatively inexpensive compared to ICU stays, ventilator stays, etc. And if you jump over to the left here, you can see that N-acetylcysteine was shown to shorten the patient's stay in the intensive care unit. If you nebulize N-acetylcysteine, it's effective in preventing ventilator-induced pneumonia, which again would shorten ICU stays and hospital stays and promote complete recovery. So we have at our disposal, we have lots of science supporting utility of N-acetylcysteine and glutathione as a preventative tool in the pandemic. And there's really no reason to not do it or to worry about, this isn't necessarily a standalone thing, but there's no reason to not do it in addition to whatever is happening medically as well. So similar to the vitamin D conversation, we're not hurting anything by taking vitamin D in most people. And just like the science shows 1 billion people are deficient in vitamin D worldwide, many people are deficient in glutathione as well. So perhaps the pandemic is due to a pandemic of immune suppression due to nutrient insufficiency or deficiency at a pandemic level. So let's open it up for questions.
So how does the common person get and know the sufficient amount of glutathione?
Testing. So as with vitamin D, glutathione levels are dynamic, right? So the more inflamed a person is, or the more oxidative stress a person has, the more they're actually metabolizing through their glutathione levels, right? So your glutathione level is in flux at all times, just like your vitamin D, just like your whole physiology. So we would want to test to know what is Kim's glutathione level right now, what is Kim's vitamin D level right now, and with that information, we can then titrate, be specific about dosing to Kim.
Is this something that you do as part of our regular testing?
I don't test glutathione specifically on everybody because it's not an inexpensive test compared to, say, a vitamin D. But I do test surrogate markers for glutathione, which surrogate marker is an indirect marker. So one that I do use commonly is called transforming growth factor beta, or TGF beta. And that one, if that is high, that's suppressing glutathione levels or inhibiting glutathione. So if we have lab high TGF beta, it's pretty safe to say that glutathione is suboptimal. And so we can use glutathione because glutathione has also been shown to inhibit TGF beta. So it's a push-pull, right? So if we have TGF beta high and we take glutathione to knock it down, then we knocked it down, which means less inhibition on our glutathione levels, so those should climb. Make sense?
Yeah, but we wouldn't self-prescribe that though, right? I mean, would we just buy it as a cautionary thing?
A person could, yeah. Yeah, you're not going to, you can overdose in vitamin D, you can overdose in glutathione. It's going to be hard to do that. But like we said, you want to have balance. Like if you take, just like I think last week we talked about fish oil as an example, but you can have too much omega-3, right? But people would say, well, they're anti-inflammatory, isn't that good? Yes, but if you're squashing all inflammation and you contract a virus, you want to create inflammation to kill the virus. So if you're too anti-inflammatory, that's an issue in that scenario. But if the statistics say 1 billion people on the planet, 1 in 7 are deficient in vitamin D, then it's pretty safe to take vitamin D on a broad scale and then test. And most people taking vitamin D are taking the recommended daily allowance, which is 10% of what they actually need. So they're never going to drive themselves, into toxicity typically. And so glutathione, similar. I don't have a hard number like the vitamin D number in terms of deficiency worldwide, but if you just look at our life, everything about our lifestyles is driving inflammation and oxidative stress in the standard American life, right? So glutathione is something that is easy to do as a preventive measure. It's just from a price perspective, it's a more expensive supplement. So you could do NAC instead, N-acetylcysteine, and hope that you convert efficiently to glutathione. Some do, some don't. There's genetic interplay there. But again, it's inexpensive.
Is there kind of a base dose of the NAC that you think would be safe for someone to take?
Oh yeah, 500 milligrams.
Okay.
And what you want, again, that's a general recommendation. On an individual level,
it's best to test, but
yeah, because depending on a person's immune setup when they're taking it, N-acetylcysteine could drive something like hives, or could create a symptom that you're like, this is supposed to be good for me, what happened? Well, again, don't watch this video and go do something. Speak with your practitioner so you know. If you're someone who's sensitive to sulfur, N-acetylcysteine is a sulfur-based amino acid, so that could create issues if you're have sulfur sensitivity. NAC, the sulfur portion of the NAC, if you start taking it, sulfur doesn't smell good. So if you have gas, you may notice an increased pungency to it because of the sulfur portion of the NAC. So there's different things to be aware of there, but in general, a 500 milligram dose is safe and effective, but speak to your provider to dial it in for you.
Is any of that in our multivitamin?
I'd have to look. Let me look real fast.
Okay.
No.
No.
Okay. But the toothpaste tube is glutathione. So if you guys, some of you out there on the big toothpaste tube of things that you take in the morning, okay, under the tongue, that's straight glutathione. So you are taking glutathione if you're currently doing that on your plan. And then some of you have N-acetylcysteine as part of your plan as well for, various things. So again, everyone on the call is different, has different makeup. So I'm using it purposely with some of you for certain things we found, not necessarily for the COVID, cytokine storm prevention deal, but as the studies suggest, it could be useful for that. And to Robin's point, if some of you are on the call and you're like, well, why don't I have that? Again, I create a plan specific to your physiology when we tested. So if your immune system was a certain way already, that would be a situation where we maybe don't want to add more glutathione. So that's why you don't have it at this point. Make sense? A question that would come up maybe is, okay, well, that's me, say, but what if I contract COVID and have a, well, then take glutathione, because that would be higher in priority at that point in time than what we're trying to do right now.
Does glutathione and white blood cells, do they interact together in like a homeostasis kind of way? Like, do they kind of do similar things?
Pat, I like it. Good question. They interact, absolutely, and that's part of glutathione's impact. So from an antiviral defense standpoint, let me show you here. Where'd it go? So yes, glutathione is going to promote antiviral defenses. So our white blood cells, one form is called macrophages. Macrophage is Latin for big eater. So if I have a cell that's infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus or COVID, that's an intracellular infection. So the virus infects the cell, goes inside, hijacks the cellular machinery in the nucleus to replicate itself. And then it busts out of that cell and goes and infects other cells. So a macrophage, or a big eater, is a white blood cell that comes and eats my cell. So I killed my cell, but I killed the virus inside it as well. Okay, so glutathione enhances the ability of macrophages against different viruses in doing that. It's called phagocytosis, or eating of the cells. Okay, it's been shown to be directly antiviral against the viruses we listed earlier, but then also supports the white blood cell response to it, like I just described. That's for macrophages. Also promotes improved natural killer cell function, which are, say, the snipers of our innate immune system for infection. And then T cells, your lymphocytes, it improves lymphocyte function. So it was in here somewhere. Here it is. So right there, Patterson, glutathione in the immune system. So low glutathione level inhibits interleukin-2 production. Interleukin-2 is a cytokine. So you hear cytokine storm. There's cytokines that are pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory. There's cytokines that promote different functions in the immune system. Think of them as like a text message that the immune system's sending back and forth to different cells. So interleukin-2 is one that drives cell proliferation. And specifically, it drives T lymphocyte proliferation. So if we're low, excuse me, if we're low on glutathione, that inhibits interleukin-2 production. So we're not proliferating our T cells or mounting the response that we need to go after that virus. Okay, so lacking glutathione is a pro-viral result, right? Whereas having enough glutathione is antiviral. If we have enough glutathione, we're maturing and proliferating our T cells, which go out and kill virus. Here, I mentioned earlier, it helps with in HIV. Here's the citation: high glutathione levels improve CD4 T cell counts in HIV patients. So again, it will promote basically the viral specific sniper cells that we want. So good question.
In the graphic that you showed, and you were talking about if you smoked, if you were male, if you're diabetic and such.
Yep.
Paul and I, we have a friend who is male, who smokes, who's pre-diabetic, and he can't wait for the vaccine. Can you load up on glutathione or NAC before you get a vaccine? And I'm not even sure what the vaccine contains and is all about. I've heard, different things about it, but is that something that we could tell him to, just load up before you go? Or
he needs to load up whether he gets the vaccine or not. Because look, he just checked off every one of these boxes. Okay, so he needs, hypothetically, he needs to load up. Obviously testing would confirm it, but in the risk factors you just checked off, those are all risk factors that we just covered here that the research shows deplete glutathione. Okay. So yes, as a prophylactic deal, that would be helpful. And if he never got the vaccine, it's likely to still be helpful in his case because, when cigarette smoke depletes cellular glutathione pool in the airways. Okay. Citing those studies right there. Okay. Smoking exacerbates oxidative stress and inflammation in the lung. So whether he ever gets the vaccine or not, if he continues to smoke, he needs glutathione. Right. Does that make sense?
Yes. And would the vaccine ever be appropriate for anyone with all of the conditions listed? Would you consider, should a person consider a vaccine?
A person should consider it with their provider and their pre-existing conditions. Yeah. They should consider it.
For glutathione, for best absorption, would you recommend taking that on an empty stomach or with food? And also, would you recommend taking it with other supplements, or should it be taken alone?
Yeah, good. It depends, of course. That's probably the safest answer I can always give, or the most annoying answer I always give, right? So it depends on where you're trying to deliver it. So if you look at glutathione, you may see, I could take a capsule, or I could take a liposomal form, or I could take this form or that form. There's research that says that glutathione isn't well absorbed in the gut. Now, my question to that research would be, well, in what gut? Because if you're, most healthy people they're using in studies aren't actually healthy as we would define it. So they could have underlying GI inflammation, and so swallowing glutathione capsules maybe don't raise blood levels because it's being used to quench the GI stuff right there. Make sense? So if that can still be useful, because if we quench the GI load, then we've got more in the future to deal with the systemic load. But if you want to hit systemic circulation sooner than the liposomal forms, we'll get there faster, because the liposomes is the glutathione encapsulated in this little fat molecule. And those fat molecules are absorbed right into the oral mucosa quickly if you say hold it under your tongue. So that's why, those of you that are on the liposomal form, I say, hey, hold it under the tongue for 30 seconds before you swallow to allow for absorption through that oral mucosa and hit the systemic circulation. And then you also, if you swallow glutathione, it's going to be broken down most times in the GI and then rebuilt. So again, with the liposomal form, it's hitting the system and not being broken down and rebuilt. Because in that process of breaking glutathione down to its constituent amino acids, which I believe are glutamic acid, cysteine, and glycine, if I remember properly. So it would be broken down and have to be rebuilt later in your digestive process. Well, there's chance when it's broken down that, hey, cysteine gets pulled over here and glycine over here, and it may not manifest as glutathione later. So does that make sense? I'm sorry?
What about injecting it?
Yeah, injection. Injection, IV, you can do IV glutathione. So it just depends on how are you, what are we dealing with? You can nebulize it, cystic fibrosis, nebulized NAC has been shown to help with cystic fibrosis. So it kind of depends on what's the tissue we're trying to impact. And are we trying to impact a specific tissue, or are we just trying to raise overall systemic levels? Did that help, Patterson?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So I guess just to wrap that up for you, Pat, if you want to impact the gut, swallowing capsules is probably fine. If you want to go systemic, it's more of a liposomal or IV or injectable type delivery. And you can also get topical glutathione for, say, rashes and that sort of thing.
And just to clarify again on the white blood cells, so it's basically like a weapon for the white blood cells to use.
It promotes white blood cell efficiency.
Okay, gotcha.
Does glutathione and NAC and vitamin D, do they help prevent you from getting COVID, or do they just help prevent the cytokine storm if you've already gotten it?
Yes.
Both?
So people would probably, roll their eyes at me for saying that, but here's what I'm saying. We've shown the research for preventing the cytokine storm, the utility of them for that, okay? Well, in that research, like we just covered here, with the T cells, with the T lymphocyte, glutathione promoting T lymphocyte efficiency, well, that would prevent, if you have sufficient immune defense, then that could prevent you from developing COVID. Make sense? Or from symptoms. So all these asymptomatic people, perhaps they have sufficient immune surveillance and defenses to, it may not prevent you from inhaling it, but it prevents it from taking hold in the system, right? And we don't necessarily want to never be exposed to things, right? That's how the immune system grows. It's like flexing immune muscles. I go to the gym to build muscle. I walk outside and breathe air to build immune muscle. Like here's exposures, do what you want. So if you're compromised, then that's a different issue. But so vitamin D is known to promote certain immunologic processes and immune efficiency. Glutathione, same thing. Vitamin C, same thing. So can we, the FDA would never let us say this prevents this, but the more robust your immune system, the lower your risk of symptoms, the lower your risk of severe symptoms. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I think, Karen, with the vaccine question, I think I don't feel like I communicated properly on that. I think it's a consideration the more risk factors you have, okay? If you're someone who doesn't really have risk factors, then my opinion of the numbers is it's riskier to get the vaccine than to not. Because of, hey, 99.5% of people survive, 80% of positive PCR tests are asymptomatic. A majority of the symptomatic people are mild, so those, and all of that adds up to 99.5% survival rate. So, at that point, the vaccine's 95% efficacy was what they're reporting. So for those individuals, to me, it appears to be more risk than reward. And the vaccine, if you look at Moderna or Pfizer and their data and their clinical trials, the vaccine wasn't even studied to prevent infection. That wasn't even a goal of the study. And even in the news blurbs, if you're watching them, they say the vaccine will not prevent infection. It will just create milder symptoms. So, we have this thought of, we associate vaccine. If I get a vaccine, I won't get infected. That's not what's happening here. And you could argue that these aren't even really vaccines by definition, because the legal definition of a vaccine is it has a killed, it has a live attenuated virus or a killed version of a previously living microbe in it to induce immunity. These vaccines don't have anything living in it and don't have anything that used to be living in them. They have synthetically created RNA molecules in them. Okay, so that code for the spike protein on the surface of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So there's no actually natural anything in the vaccine, and it's not producing immunity. All it's doing is decreasing symptoms, and that's coming out of their own publications and clinical trials.
Do you see the biggest risk in the vaccine, the preservatives that are being used in them, or is there something else?
Well, the preservatives would be one, and then the something else is that it's a synthetic nucleic acid that is being injected into you. So, anytime you inject something synthetic into you, there's the potential for the immune system to see this foreign thing and be like, holy cow, what is that? And if that nucleic acid is integrated into self tissue, well, potentially now we recognize self. And we already know with vaccines that aren't COVID vaccines, there's a thing called Asia syndrome, or adjuvant syndrome induced, autoimmune syndrome induced by adjuvants. So that's what Asia stands for. And so an adjuvant in a vaccine is the things like aluminum or mercury, or something that will cause an inflammatory response to pique the immune system interest in hopes that it then recognizes Hep B or measles, mumps, rubella, or whatever the vaccine is, and creates antibodies to it. So we already have a long history of vaccines inducing autoimmunity. Well, now this one is injecting a synthetically made nucleic acid, RNA molecule, which they're hoping is integrated into our cells. Well, then that looks like Frankenstein to an immune system, possibly. And it's just, and I've heard both sides, and I'm in forums with immunologists that, some people that I've learned from and respect highly, and I'm doing this with them because it's like, science, if you're not vaccinating, you're promoting the pandemic. And it's like, yeah, but this isn't even like what it's being marketed as isn't even what it is. And if it's not creating immunity against it, why are we doing it? Right. So, and we have all of, we have science showing here's natural things that people can do pre-infection, ideally, to create immune robustness. And over here, I don't know if you guys saw, but last week, the National Institutes of Health approved ivermectin for a treatment option for COVID. Okay. So they used to be, no, we're against it. They improved it to, you could use it as an option. We're not for or against it. But that's a big step, because it's that they were banning people from prescribing it for it. They're like, yeah, go ahead. Because it's this, the COVID Critical Care Alliance is a bunch of I believe, infectious disease doctors and urgent care doctors who've banded together and been like, look, we need tools right now. We have tools right now, like ivermectin, like hydroxychloroquine, drugs that we've had for decades that have good safety profiles that are being effective in clinical care. Let's use these.
I thought ivermectin is a horse dewormer. That's how I've always known of it. Is this a different ivermectin?
Nope. It's an anti-parasitic. Yep.
Oh. Interesting.
But it's showing efficacy. So, so you have to wonder, and I don't know how you guys think, but it's like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, they've been around for decades, so they're no longer proprietary. So, the profit off them is minuscule, versus if we create a blockbuster vaccine, there's billions there. And yeah, we want to trust science, but we have to remember that science very quickly, when that much money is involved, becomes biased one way or another. Like, I have my biases. I'm going to read a paper different than this person is. So yeah, we have to do our best to deal with our biases, but correcting, just like realizing, hey, I read from this bias versus there's $2 billion behind how I'm reading this or conducting this study is a totally different scenario.
So last week when we were talking about, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, if you were to get COVID and you Paul smuggles me in the vitamin D at 300,000 IUs, the whole bottle.
Yeah.
And that's what I meant about loading up on, because our friend is going to get this vaccine soon, and because you had mentioned 500 milligrams of NAC.
Mhm.
Is there a high dose, safe dose that he could take before he goes, or anyone?
I can't give that recommendation because I don't know the person, and he already has plenty of issues, it sounds like. So I'd have him, speak to some hopefully know someone that can help there. But your thinking is correct in that. Let's talk about vaccine damaged children. Okay. Vaccines, one way vaccines damage people is they drive inflammation, oxidative stress. Plus they have a bunch of toxins and all that, which is part of the oxidative stress and inflammation. So you give a kid a vaccine, the doctors, you're going to go take your kid to the pediatrician. They're going to get the MMR and the this and the that all on the same day. Okay. And the doctor's going to say, your kid's going to have a fever, give them some Tylenol to break the fever. You'll be good to go. Well, Tylenol depletes glutathione from the brain. So in the perfect storm, in the wrong kid, that kid may have received those multiple vaccines on the same day. The parent doing what they think is the right thing, following the doctor's advice, gives them Tylenol to, break the fever. And maybe that was the straw that breaks the camel's back, and we have a learning disability or autism or something like that. Okay, so we need the glutathione defense to deal with the vaccine. Okay, well, vaccines don't cause autism because that kid got vaccine and didn't have autism. I didn't say the vaccine caused it, but the vaccine plus maybe genetics that are inefficient in glutathione defenses, plus Tylenol, which leach the defenses that were already there, plus maybe the kid's diet and whatever, and perfect storm, bang, right? So I said all that to say, if you talk to different doctors about a slower vaccine schedule, or how do we do our best to prevent those things, that perfect storm, we'll load up on glutathione pre-vaccine, take a bunch of glutathione post-vaccine. So you kind of bookend the treatment to give yourself the best shot, right? Just like, after a hard, I've competitively CrossFitted in the past, and post workout or post competition, I'm going to ramp up my anti-inflammatories because I know I just spent a day doing 3 workouts that destroy my body or break me down a lot. So I'm going to need assistance in repairing, versus if I don't do that, I'll probably still repair, but I'm at increased risk of injury or whatever if I go work out again tomorrow without having done that. Does that make sense? So yes, buffering the defenses is good, but if we live a lifestyle that's, healthy, then we're better off, right? Like he's being very reactionary right now by doing that. And obviously there's differences in paradigms in how he lives his life and how you're living your life. But again, the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we're living a certain way and something bad happens, well, we're going to have the best possible outcome because we went into it like this versus going into it like that. Make sense?
Yes.
And there's studies showing that, if we use head injury as an example, people going into a head injury, the better their omega-3 fatty acid level going in, the better their glutathione level going in, the lower their systemic inflammation. God bless you. The better the better they recover, or the less severe the outcome of the head injury, right? So, the healthier we are before we're exposed to COVID, the more likely we have a mild or asymptomatic course. The sicker we are, as these studies are showing, the higher the risk of a severe course, right? So if he gets the vaccine and continues to smoke and doesn't exercise and eats poorly and stays up late and all that, I mean, say the vaccine did everything everyone wanted it to do. Okay, he just checked off COVID as something he won't die from, but he's still got all those other things that, you know, are still there. And that's what's frustrating for me, living in the world I live in, is, you know, I'm posting studies like this, and this, and I'll get trolls on Facebook being like, well, you're not on the front lines, and, you know, you want people to die. And it's like, well, people are dying because they've lived like crap for so long, and now here's an acute thing that's killing them. But where's your you know, where's your militants, or where was your militants pre-COVID, you know, when people are still doing the things that set them up for risk of death and COVID? Why aren't you going after gyms being closed and fast food restaurants being open during COVID, the same vehemence that you're going after me for saying take vitamin C and glutathione, right? Like, if it's really about saving people, then we need a whole cultural, societal change in how we're living, not just another vaccine or another wonder drug, because that's just walking to the edge of the cliff again and waiting for someone to push us for a different reason. What else?
Well, it takes work to be healthy. So, and for a lot of people, it's too much work. They don't want to, I've done that where I didn't want to work that hard, or I felt like I didn't have enough time to put forth that effort. So, it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of concentration and dedication.
Mm-hmm.
So, sometimes for me, I had to be in a lot of pain before I finally said, okay, it's time.
Yeah. And that,
Expensive too.
well,
Supplements, and it's expensive being sick, true. Yeah, but supplements and organic food, and it's expensive.
Yeah, it is, unless you're comparing it to chemotherapy.
Yeah.
Emergency room.
It's
Mm-hmm.
and I'm with you, Kim. And it's part of it, again, is cultural and society. Like, we are a reactive society. We are instant gratification. We don't like accountability. We like to be able to say, oh, it's genetic, it's not my fault. What pill can I swallow until I die? Right? But
Right.
in reality, it's epigenetics, which means you are accountable, and every choice we make matters. And that accountability, that can be a bummer, but it also gives us hope, because when you have something and they say, oh, sorry, it's genetic, you're like, well, why should I try? It wasn't my fault to get here. I'm going to die anyway, so I might as well be happy, or perceive as happy on my way down. But life is in nature. You're either growing or you're decaying, right? And it takes energy to grow. It takes energy to win or progress in anything. You do nothing, it's easy to decay. And that's what we're doing. And we're brainwashed into decaying from the start. Like, our society is sitting, computers, devices, Bluetooth everything. So you don't even have to, I was walking my dog last night, and my neighbor's mother-in-law lives around the block from us. And I saw him coming out of her garage, and he's like, yeah, I was just installing thermostats that I can control from my phone at my house to turn the heat up and down for her. And I was like, oof. So she'll call him and say it's too hot. So he'll get on the phone and turn it down when she could walk over there, and wow. So this is the world we live in. And when you bow to technology, it's very useful in certain ways, but again, it's also, an issue. So so how can we make this? I had a great teacher, when I was in school, not teacher, but mentor, who taught me, but he wasn't a teacher at the school. And he said, okay, how do you apply this in real life? Apple or donut? Every day you're choosing, right? Do I want to compete for the front parking spot or the last parking spot at Harris Teeter? Right? Do I want stairs or elevator? Right? Am I gonna watch the news, or am I gonna read Think and Grow Rich? Right? Or am I gonna watch CNN, or am I gonna watch a more reliable news source, less biased, say? So we have choices. We have power over ourselves to be accountable. And every time I pick apple over donut, I'm doing better. Every time I pick water over soda or water over beer, I'm doing better. Every time I take the stairs over the elevator or escalator, I'm doing better. When I park in the back of Harris Teeter, it's cold, but I'll walk faster. It'll be better for me, right? So, and if you make more better choices more consistently over time, you're winning, right? So, I've had patients in the past who, it was more in the chiropractic world, not when I was doing the functional medicine stuff, but hey, I love going to Hooters and eating 12 wings and having a vodka. Okay. Well, and I'm not going to change that. That's a non-compromisable. Like, I'm not giving this up. All right. Well, for every 12 wings you have to eat a salad. And for every glass of vodka, you have to have a glass of water. Okay, I can do that. All right. Well, they just cut in half the deficiency and toxicity they were consuming and added 50% more sufficiency, right? So over time, your taste buds change, your body changes, and you start to realize, wow. And I did this when I was making changes. That pizza I used to love, I feel sick like 5 minutes after, and my gut's terrible and whatever, right? Well, I used to think that was feeling good, but now that I actually am healthy, I realize I was sick for so long. You've all probably had that experience, maybe not Michelle or Pat yet, but as you build momentum into the system, inevitably we have a cheat day or something, and then most of the time the next day you tell me I fell off and holy cow, I felt awful. And I'm not even mad at you because I'm like, good, you needed to learn that,
Yes.
right? Because that, until you do that, you're just trusting me. But then you do it and you're like, wow, wow. A, it tasted different. Not as good as I remember. And B, I don't feel good. It wasn't worth that.